When we think about using text evidence, the first thing that comes to mind is using direct quotations from our text to support our point, to prove our point, to make our point seem valid. But when we look at the work of real writers who are writing analytically, we actually find out that they use paraphrasing more than they use direct quotation of the text. Now, in another video, we're going to talk about when you use direct quotes and which direct quotes you use. But today, we want to sit on this idea of paraphrasing, or putting a text in our own words to use as evidence to support our point. Today's move is paraphrasing text evidence. Let's take a look at an example from Suzy Hansen, who is writing from the historical magazine Lapham's Quarterly. As Gülersoy described, the Bazaar was operated under the vakif, pious foundation system, which drew on charitable contributions to fund the market's construction and then eventually collect rents from the shopkeepers. These rents in turn funded other things, the maintenance of the Bazaar, as well as public institutions such as schools and hospitals and mosques. So in this piece about the Grand Bazaar, Suzy Hansen is quoting another historian. And instead of using a direct quotation from the text, she felt it would be easier, it would be better, it would say more to the reader to simply paraphrase and put it in her own words. So let's look at what we can notice here to figure out for our own paraphrasing techniques. The first thing I notice is that she cites her source, as Gülersoy described. This is important because this is what shows that she's not plagiarizing. This is what protects Suzy Hansen from plagiarism. She is acknowledging here that this is what someone else discovered and wrote about, not her, but she's going to explain it to us in her own words. One of the big reasons that you might paraphrase instead of directly quoting is because the information you want to communicate is huge. It's big and it's long and it's just too much to directly quote. So look at what Hansen does here. In 2 short sentences, she condenses the information that Gülersoy gives into just essentials, and then she puts those essentials into her own words. Here's a second example. This one is from Scientific American. So we've seen how a historian paraphrases other historians. Now let's look at how some scientists do the same thing. These scientists write, as we have seen during the COVID pandemic, some people think that the absence of consensus is an indication of some sort of scandal or malfeasance instead of the way science is conducted. From there, one might be inclined to doubt the entire system, including any subsequent consensus. So we see these writers doing the same thing, but a little bit differently. It starts with this introductory phrase to give credit to its source again. What's the source? Well, the source is twofold. It's what we saw during the COVID pandemic, and it is this article that is hyperlinked here. So instead of naming someone else's name, we can also give credit to a source that we're paraphrasing through hyperlinking. And then, once again, in just a couple of sentences, the issue is condensed down to its essentials and put into the writer's own words. Let's look at a third example to see this in action one more time. This is from Professor Andrew Newman, who is an English professor. He writes, titles become traditional when they're passed down through generations. As the education historian Jana Perillo observes, parents tend to approve of having their children study the same books that they once did. Are you seeing the pattern yet? I bet you are. Here we have it, as this other person observes, and then condensed and put into his own words what it is that she actually observed. I want to show you an example from literature, though, because so many of us are quoting the text when we read a book and we're writing analytically about that text. So I want you to see what this kind of paraphrasing looks like. This is from the New York Times. In one of the funniest scenes in the novel, Abby, who has tried to convince Ralph that the mother isn't alive, agrees to go into the basement to investigate. Now imagine this is a scene that this writer could have quoted, but it's probably heavy on dialogue. It's probably fairly long. And so instead of getting into the weeds with that direct quote, the writer finds it's easier to give the text evidence of this specific moment in the book in paraphrase. Now notice, Danielle Trussoni does the same thing. She starts with giving credit to the source. This isn't her own idea. This is something that happens in the novel. So in one of the funniest scenes of the novel, and then we get a really short version of what's likely a longer conversation, right? Abby agrees to go into the basement to investigate. It's paraphrased. It's condensed down to the essential that she wanted to show and put into her own words. So how are you going to go about putting things into your own words? Well, this is a strategy that I have used and I've shared with my students for lots of years. The first thing you're going to do is select the part of the text that you want to paraphrase, and you're going to read it to yourself. Then you're going to push it aside so that it's not even in your line of vision, and you are going to write down what you remember. Typically, we remember the essentials, and typically when we're just writing from memory, we're putting things in our own words. Then you're going to pull that original text back over and compare the two. First of all, you're going to make sure that you've used your own words, right? And not their words. And then you're going to make sure that you haven't forgotten anything. You haven't left out something that's really important that you need to go back and add in. You're going to make sure that you acknowledge your source. I would just use as so-and-so observes, or as this writer describes, or in one scene of the novel, because we've seen our mentors do that and we know it works. So make sure that you do that, or hyperlink, so that you're acknowledging your sources. So where in your writing have you quoted text, but maybe you really ought to just paraphrase? Where are there extra opportunities to give textual evidence in your writing through paraphrase? You've got a lot of quotes already, but now you can do a little bit more because you have this tool. Where can you condense something, put it in your own words, but acknowledge the original source so that you're not plagiarizing and that you're making it really clear that your idea comes from somewhere else? Thanks for joining me today. Please make sure that you like and subscribe so that you don't miss any future mini moves for writers.